Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm Mickey Huff with Eleanor Goldfield. Today, in the first segment, silencing student reporters threatens public's right to know. Isn't that true? Our first guest today is Jim Rodenbush, and he has worked with award-winning student media organizations helping to mentor the next generation of journalists for the past 16 years. Most recently, Jim served as director of student media at Indiana University and taught in the media school. During his time there, the Indiana Daily Student won 12 Pacemaker Awards and was twice named College Media Outlet of the Year. Before coming to IU, Rodenbush managed student media programs at Colorado State, Penn State, and Webster Universities. Along the way, he taught courses in reporting, writing, editing, and media management. Rodenbush is a frequent conference speaker and former president of the Western Association of University Publication Managers and executive director of the Indiana Collegiate Press Association. Jim holds a bachelor's in journalism from Webster University and a master's from the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. Jim Rodenbush, welcome to the program today.
Thank you for having me.
So there's a reason that we have you on the program here today, Jim. And you just wrote an amazing piece for us at Project Censored online, Silencing Student Reporters Threatens Public Right to Know. And of course, the reason that you were sort of thrust into the limelight, perhaps against your wishes, for the reasons that catapult you there. You had a pretty serious run-in with folks over at Indiana University, or I should say they had a run-in with you. Could you tell our audience a little bit about your background and your time at Indiana University, and of course, the fiasco that kind of took place there with you that led the college to dismiss you from your position, and basically it was because you were standing up for the rights of students at the paper and pushing back against censorship. So I'd like to give you some space to tell a little bit more of your story to our audience because it is so very important. Student journalism is it's an incredible thing that we have at our institutions if we're still lucky enough to have journalism programs in our schools these days, the way things are going. And you have a long career at really fostering the next generation of young journalists. So Jim Rodenbush, tell us a little bit about what happened at Indiana University.
Yeah, so I came to Indiana in the summer of 2018. At that point, I had been in student media for about 6 or 7 years at some of the schools that you mentioned at Webster University, Penn State University, Colorado State University. And, IU was really a huge opportunity for me, a dream position, if you will, because the Indiana Daily Student was this renowned student media outlet, and the opportunity to be in the role of director was just a huge thing for me. So that was in the summer of 2018. Now, if you fast forward about a year or so ago, is when the situation with IU really started to unfold. There had been some budget decisions that had been made. At the time, the print edition of the IDS had been changed from weekly to approximately once every 2 weeks. That had been a budget decision, one that was made because we had been and needed some modifications from the budget side. But what happened progressively as that decision was made was that I had begun to hear from my direct supervisor that there was concerns from the university level, specifically the provost of the university, that the provost was still seeing copies, traditional news copies of the IDS on newsstands. When they had made the budget decision to go from weekly to, once every couple of weeks, they had leaned into this idea that they would be special editions of the newspaper, promotional content within the newspaper, anything that would have been something positive, or hey, welcome to campus, like a visitor's guide, homecoming edition, a sports preview, fun stuff, but nothing that would lean toward a traditional front page newspaper. And that had progressed. You have conversations where you hear about higher ups being concerned with things, and you have those conversations and you move on, but it got progressively more intense, if you will, come the spring and the fall and into the fall of 2025, where it went from, hey, we're concerned about the traditional newspaper still being in the newsstands, to shifting over to, we need you to make sure that there are no traditional newspapers in the newsstands. It went from a suggestion and a concern to what I felt was an order. And in my role, we had direct language with my job description that indicated that the student leaders and the student editors were the ones that were responsible for the content. And that is the message that I relayed to them. On top of that, Indiana University is a public university. And so, the student reporters have basic First Amendment rights to practice journalism. And so the idea that I somehow would be the one to say, hey, your newspaper can no longer be a newspaper. It specifically has to be a piece of promotional content, which just wasn't something that I was willing to do.
So, in other words, the provost's office or the administration at the college wanted to turn it into a PR organ for the campus and basically strip it from any actual journalism or reporting that was going on around the community.
Yes, and it was specifically to the print edition. The forward-facing thing, as I ended up telling students, that parents would see, that people walking on campus would see. They were interested in having no traditional news be in that paper.
So yeah, curiously, it's a newspaper without news. So again, this is curious because it's a public university and there are pretty well-known guidelines and rules. Administrators, I mean, even the faculty advisor, even you're not supposed to meddle with the content of the student paper.
No, because I was an employee of Indiana University, which made me, part of that institution. And, the conversations that I attempted to have with administrators, and obviously they didn't go well, or we wouldn't be having this conversation, is that, the university was in a position where it could make all the budget decisions it wanted to. And it did. Taking the paper from weekly to once every 2 weeks was a clear-cut budget decision that they were allowed to make. They crossed the line when that budget decision became connected to content. Like it had to be content neutral. The second that it no longer became content neutral is when you're, in fact, messing with the First Amendment rights and you're going into censorship of the paper. To me, it's simple.
It seems like a cut and dry case, man. And I mean, it seems, having this experience myself, having, chaired a journalism program in California for 5 years through a revitalization stage, it was made very clear to me at multiple stages that I, as the department chair, had no say over the content of the student paper. The faculty advisor that was put in place and faculty member was not supposed to guide the content. They weren't supposed to help students write the stories. None of this. I mean, I'm saying this to you, you know this. I'm saying it for our audience sake because a lot of folks maybe don't realize that there are pretty strict guidelines for college news publications at public colleges. There's a lot of stuff that we're not permitted to do. So if we're not able, as a faculty or as an advisor or as a chair, the people that are more intimately involved in it, I mean, how do people that are completely disassociated with it, that don't usually understand anything even about journalism, get to come in and make decisions? I mean, you mentioned it's a budgetary decision, and of course administrators can make budgetary decisions. But do you suspect that this was all part of a longer play to gradually just strip, or to take the teeth out of the paper and turn it into an advertisement for the college? Or do you think they stumbled into this? Was there any particular articles that maybe students were writing per se? I think that there was a piece from Foundation of Individual Rights and Expression on campus expression and free speech issues. Was that something that triggered anything at the campus?
If it did, those conversations were not happening, with me. And the thing about the Indiana Daily Student is that its journalism has had teeth to it forever. And that was part of the reasons why coming to the IDS was such a huge professional thing for me. Like, it covers the university hard, it covers the community hard, and it is, at that point, it had been 7 to 8 years of the students delivering really top-notch journalism. And so for it to be a thing overnight where they decided that they didn't want this to happen suddenly, I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense, because yes, you may in fact think that you're exerting content over the printed edition, but the IDS has a massive online audience and all the articles are still appearing there.
So you mentioned earlier, this actually made some press. Fire, the group I just mentioned, actually wrote a pretty detailed piece about what was happening, right? In fact, the title of their article was "What the hell is going on at Indiana University? With no sense of irony, IU censors student newspaper for reporting on poor free speech ranking." So you're not sure how connected those two things are per se?
Specifically, no. I mean, I was aware of that article, and kudos to Fire. Their advocacy and their response to this has been fantastic. But if that was some sort of tipping point, I mean, I'm not saying that it could have been, but that was not anything that was immediately brought to my attention. And over the years, those above me, even if they were just conversations that ultimately led to nowhere, those above me were not shy in telling me when we had stories that ruffled some feathers or upset some people, and I just never heard about any of it at all.
So that's interesting too, because it also would indicate that if there was some shift in the administration, I mean, other than what you described, some of the shuffling, but if there was a shift in an attitude towards the student paper, you were completely unaware of that.
I would say yes and no. The greater, and I would be speculating because I just simply was not a part of these conversations. But I can say to you that it was my last couple of years at IU, and the issues that surrounded the IDS, they corresponded with what would be logically described as a volatile time on the campus as well. IU was at the center of campus demonstrations that were going on. IU was at the focus of the state government, to where there were huge budget cuts that impacted every part of campus, and just the general existence of campus life in the United States in 2026. Like, IU has been a part of that, and so the logical thing would be that this was just a culmination that the IDS happened to be a part of. And that was this idea that perhaps the university was trying really, really hard not to get the attention of anyone for anything negative. And while you can't control what's happening online, you can control what people see when they walk on your campus. And again, I'm connecting dots here as a result of meetings that I was not participating in. But to point the IDS as kind of a fallout of a larger issues going on at IU, that would be a very reasonable conclusion.
I want to get to some other details. Maybe you can share a few other details of some of the specifics that happened. But again, as I know, this case ended up attracting quite a bit of attention in the media, and of course, it attracted the attention of the Student Press Law Center, right? And you even have your own IU censorship tracker going on over there that's following your case. I mean, the SPLC.org, those folks, they're pretty serious about maintaining press freedom on college campuses, I can tell you. In the situation that I had described to you that led to my revitalizing the journalism program at the college I was at before, there were some issues happening with the faculty shakeups at the time that did draw the attention of the SPLC. It turned out that there wasn't much for them to look at. It was more of a faculty leaving and the program starting to fall apart. It wasn't a malicious thing. It wasn't a controlled demolition, right? It was more bureaucratic ineptitude, letting things go. And to the college's credit, they reversed it and we rebuilt the program, And I say that because I feel like that's a rare instance where the administration, instead of just tossing and getting rid of something and letting it go away, they really thought that it was important to keep. and they fought to keep it and spent time, money, and resources on keeping it. And I spent my last several years at that college rebuilding that program, which is now thriving, which I'm both happy and proud to say I had some part in. But it's fascinating that it can go different ways depending upon who's in those powerful positions making decisions, Jim.
And yeah, and anywhere that there's a thriving journalism program at the university level, that's nothing but good news for everybody. Like that kind of teaching and that kind of learning lab that you can provide for future journalists is again nothing but great news. And IU was my fourth campus, my fourth university, and so you have a chance at being at four different universities to experience things from all different perspectives. And one of the things that was happening at IU concurrently is that, the Indiana Daily Student and IU student media as a whole was attempting to secure funding, secure a greater investment, secure just kind of like those resources that would help grow, the IDS along with campus television, along with campus radio, along with all these programs to help. And we, at the same time, were running into huge roadblocks in terms of, hey, do you want to pay for this? Hey, this is a fantastic student media program. Hey, you have all of the tools here for this to be the preeminent student media program and student journalism program. And we have a lot of difficulties at dealing with that and conquering that as well.
I'd like to remind our listeners that you're tuned to the Project Censored Show. I am Mickey Huff with Eleanor Goldfield, and in this segment of the program today, we're speaking with Jim Rodenbush, who was at Indiana University and oversaw the Indiana Daily Student, the award-winning newspaper at Indiana University, and was let go after being put in a really peculiar situation, and we'll get to some more of that after we come back from this brief break. Stay tuned. 3, 2, 1... Welcome back to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm Mickey Huff with Eleanor Goldfield. In this segment, we're speaking with Jim Rodenbush, and we've been talking about his experience at Indiana University. He was the director of student media there until the university let him go, fired him, essentially. For basically, my understanding is you were standing up for rights of students to print stories as they saw fit and resist intervention from university administrators. That's accurate, Jim Rodenbush?
100% accurate.
So had you had these experiences before? You said this was your fourth college that you were privileged to be part of, and based on the things that you were just saying before the break, it sounds like you're a really passionate and committed educator. You really care about the future of journalism and student journalism. Had you experienced anything like this at your other positions?
No, part of the deal in being in a forward-facing role within student media, is that you're gonna get questions and concerns and opinions from those at a faculty and administrative level. That's absolutely part of the deal. And so over the years, sure, you'll hear from upset audiences, but in terms of you need to do this or else kind of directive or order, it literally never happened to me until it happened to me. And so this was absolutely a first time experience.
So you sound like you were blindsided. I mean, you sound like it did kind of come out of, I think the degree to which that things escalated seems shocking.
Yeah, and I've been asked I've been asked this question because it's an obvious, like, were you surprised or were you expecting it? And it's equal parts yes and no. You mentioned the Student Press Law Center. Kudos to them for everything that they do, and they were and have continued to be such a huge help to me. And as things were escalating at IU, I did reach out to the SPLC. I'm sure they wouldn't, mind me telling the world that. And one of the conversations that I had with them was like, hey, what happens? What should I do if I get fired? Those words came out of my mouth before this happened. And so this obviously was something that I was aware of. And from a personal side, I was absolutely aware that this could have been a scenario and the impact that it would have on me. That being said, walking into that appointment on that afternoon, it's almost like shocked but not shocked. If I had to be surprised by one thing, I would be surprised by how quickly it happened. Because once this truly escalated, you're talking about less than a month. And I would have guessed perhaps a couple of steps in between to go right from the situation to the worst case scenario. That how quickly that happened was probably the most surprising part.
It's pretty riveting. Curiosity, did you have what job protections did you have at the public university? Was it a tenured position?
No,
No.
I was considered a staff member at IU,
Right.
and so to that end, zero.
So no staff union, no other job protection there?
No, not for me personally. I mean,
Right.
they obviously, there are protections for tenured faculty, and there's some graduate student happenings where they're trying to get those protections at that level. But for me as a full-time staff member in the role that I had, no, there was none.
That's pretty riveting. Also shows the state of labor in this country, I suppose, more broadly. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't have protections, but you would think, and many would think, that at a public university, that someone in your position would have some kind of protection and recourse. And it sounds like you didn't have a lot of protection, and it sounds like your only recourse is through the courts.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that, and again, kudos to the SPLC. They were able to connect me with representation in the state of Indiana. And a couple of weeks after my firing, there was a lawsuit filed on my behalf.
So you also, in the piece that you wrote on silencing student reporters threatening the public's right to know, which you can see for free at projectcensored.org, you did talk about how your case attracted attention. I mean, look, I knew this case when it was happening, and it's been a while since we were trying to connect, and I'm glad that we finally were able to connect. But the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, other groups, this got some play, and in fact, you were invited to SPJ's MediaWise, or the event they had last
Media
fall.
Fest.
I'm sorry, Media Fest. Yeah, that was last fall, right? So you were invited to tell your story in other places too. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, interesting timing. I was fired on a Tuesday, and I was on a plane to Washington 2 days later because Media Fest was going on that weekend. And it wasn't just, it was a combined conference. It wasn't just the Society of Professional Journalists, but was also the Associated Collegiate Press and the College Media Association. So I had already had IU-sponsored travel plans to attend this conference, which were taken away from me. And so the timing of that was pretty interesting. And I literally got off the plane at Reagan at 6 p.m. By 7 p.m., I was getting an ovation at an SPJ mixer. And so that's just how quickly that all came together.
Yeah, you certainly deserve more than an ovation, Jim, for what you went through. I don't know if you are at liberty to speak about this, but I'll put it out there anyway. I can only imagine that you had a rapport with your student staff. What was their reaction to what had happened?
Well, my relationship, particularly with my student leaders, was very open. And so, again, those student leaders in particular were aware that this was going on as it was going on, because, one of the things that I would tell them repeatedly is that what I know, they know. And so they were very, very aware that something was building. They were among the first to learn, when I was fired. And they shared that information with their own staffs, and so the lines of communication here, they were unfortunately fully involved in things that were going on.
So your case has again attracted a lot of attention. You mentioned in the article you wrote that it brought national attention and support, including recognition from the Radio, Television, Digital News Association Foundation with a 2026 First Amendment Award. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, they reached out to me in early 2026, telling me that I had been, selected as one of the people to, receive this award. And my wife and I traveled back to Washington, where all these things are happening, 2 weeks ago for this dinner and to receive this award. And I tell you, there have been a lot of people that have reached out, and that support has been incredible. But this moment in particular was really impactful from my end, because it put me in a room filled with hundreds of like-minded people. Put me in a tuxedo for the first time in forever. Like, this was this was a big deal, what was happening. And the thing that I can take away from it is, again, heartening to be around so many people that understand and that are there with you. Because as you're going through the situation, or as I was going through the situation at Indiana University, I was always the lone dissenting voice in the room. And when you're being told how wrong you are about the things that you were saying and the stance that you're taking, you can get to the point where you start to question whether you're kind of losing your mind a little bit. And so to be able to kind of have that moment where it's recognized, so like, yes, we hear you, we understand you, we stand with you, that was really a huge deal.
Jim, we're in that room with you, and we're all cheering you on, and we certainly stand with you at Project Censored. It just sounds like you've had a pretty harrowing year. It's good to see, however, that you've got such great support, and you do have so many people that now know your story. And again, it's of course very impactful to your life, what's happening to you directly. But you point out in your piece that this is part of a much broader pattern of attacks on the press, and particularly student press. And what are some lessons maybe you suggest to our audience that we should take away from this? And I'm assuming one of them is vigilance for sure. But what can you tell us about that? And how are some ways maybe that people can support you and other student press publications?
I had thought for the longest time, because again, I was in my 16th year with student publications. I had thought for the longest time that, issues that face the professional level were just issues that were never going to make their way to this extent to college publications. And I was spectacularly wrong on that. And I think that's a huge lesson to take away for everyone, is that if this can happen at one of the preeminent student media publications in the country, it can happen anywhere. And so, the lesson is to pay attention to what's going on. The lesson is to be vocally loud when things are happening, when things smell funny, when things look different. The lesson is to understand who your advocacy groups are, because FIRE and SPLC, they are ready to protect and defend you vigorously. And so, again, to be aware, to understand your rights, to understand who your advocates are. These are all things that are just, unfortunately, part of the business at this point. And it's really on anyone who's participating, even as an audience, like, engage with the content. If there's an outlet that you are particularly fond of or invested in, like, be present. It's going to take everyone to be loud in protecting, basic First Amendment rights, in order for, student, and, this is journalism in general, but for student media organizations specifically, to continue to grow and thrive and do the work that they're there to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. And I think that, you make so many good points here. And of course, in the article that you penned for us at Project Censored, and you write in your article about the courage of student journalists, right? And the support of press freedom advocates. And again, standing up for these rights is really important. And you come to the end of your article saying free expression is not guaranteed. We must actively defend it in classrooms, newsrooms, and in every space where truth risks being silenced. And in 2026, Jim Rodenbush, when we look around in the United States, there are great risks for truths being silenced.
It's a reflection. As I said, I never thought it would reach the student media level, but we are asking student journalists these days to do professional level work.
Absolutely.
And the IDS, I would tell people it was as close to being a professional newsroom without as close as possible. And so if we are asking this of our student journalists, we have to expect that the risks are going to mirror that of professional newsrooms. And so it absolutely is a threat, as it is for every professional organization in the country. And so we just have to we have to continue to pay attention. We have to start paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, I have to just give a shout out. I couldn't agree with you more. Shout out to the old my old college DVC, the Inquirer. I mean, award-winning student paper that has gone through some rough times and came out the other end. And of course, at Ithaca College, the Ithacan, just an absolutely incredible paper. The students do absolutely amazing work that is very much on the professional level of community journalism. And so much now, if colleges are lucky enough to have a journalism program, in many cases, they're functioning as a news organization in an otherwise news desert climate. And so you students are really rising to the level of the kind of reporting that we really need to see. And Jim Rodenbush, it's just an honor to talk to you, and I appreciate you taking your time to talk to us about your story. But I appreciate even more that your courage and how you stood up for what not only what you believe in, but stood up for the rights of students, and you paid a price for it. And I know that you have a lawsuit going on, and I really hope that you get the justice that you so richly deserve.
Thank you.
Coming up next, you'll hear from Eleanor Goldfield. Stay tuned.